My name is Emil Lurch. I'd like to welcome you to the Building a DevOps Culture in Public Sector session. My name is, as I said, my name is Emil Lurch. I'm a senior consultant with the professional services team here at Amazon Web Services. With me on stage, I've got Scott Day, who's the CTO from SoundExchange, Reed Badgett, who's the senior director of engineering at SoundExchange, David Joseph, who's the senior director for DevOps automation, adoption and implementation at Ellucian, and Scott Mumal, who's the senior manager for DevOps adoption and implementation at Ellucian. So as we speak about DevOps, a lot of people start immediately thinking about tooling and automation. Tooling and automation is certainly important, but it's only one aspect of DevOps. More importantly, when we start to implement DevOps and move down that DevOps journey, we need to think about cultural change. By integrating development and operations, including security, into a single team that works together to achieve a common goal. The team is going to be thinking about systems as a whole, not just the development portion of it or the operations or security, but they need to think about everything at once in a holistic manner. They want to try to amplify those feedback loops. So as we move code from development to test to production, we want to monitor that code as it goes through all of those steps. We want to get feedback from production so that we can enter the next cycle of development in a more proactive way, being able to prioritize appropriately the next set of features, bugs that need to be fixed, security enhancements, those types of things. And then finally, that team needs to engage in a culture of continuous experimentation and learning. That's how we learn, we develop, we get better, faster results, more agile teams, lower cost. So the State of DevOps report by Puppet Labs, they come out with one every year. This is the last year that they have. Here's some statistics that you can see in terms of the benefits of DevOps. In summary, these benefits are higher quality systems, they're delivered faster, and have a lower implementation cost. That lower implementation cost can be manifested just in strict dollars terms, or in terms of engineering effort that is now available for use on other projects, additional features, more bug fixes, enhanced security. So to tell you a little bit about their journey down the DevOps road, I'd like to invite SoundExchange to come up first and talk about their journey and their adoption of DevOps and the benefits that they've seen.
Thanks, Neil. Hello, I'm Scott Day. I'm the CTO of SoundExchange. I'm here with Reed Badgett, our Senior Director for Engineering. And it's our pleasure to be here today to share our experience about implementing DevOps on top of the AWS cloud. We're going to be presenting how DevOps and AWS played key enabling roles in getting our company to transform its technology platform and achieve our strategic business goals. First, a little bit about SoundExchange. We were formed in 2000 as a result of some US copyright legislation that passed in the 1990s. We became a fully independent organization in the year 2003. And essentially, we are an organization that works at the center of the digital music industry. We're developing innovative, efficient, and trusted business solutions that benefit the entire industry. We're located just a few blocks south of here, about 170 employees right in downtown DC. We play a very critical role in the digital music ecosystem. We're the sole US entity that collects and distributes sound recording performance royalties for about 3,000 non-interactive, more commonly referred to internet radio services, satellite radio, and cable TV music services. In 2016, we distributed about $884 million in royalties to our registered recording artists and record labels. And overall, there's about 130,000 entities that we distribute royalties to on a regular basis. And then to date, in our history, we've distributed over $4.5 billion in royalties. So it's a growing part of the revenue stream for the music industry today. And basically, we're at the forefront of the transformation that the music industry has gone through from a largely physical product to then a digital product and now digitally streamed business. And we do that by creating and deploying innovative solutions to power the global music community, and we ensure that the creators are paid transparently, accurately, efficiently, and quickly. So let me talk a little bit about our technology transformation and how DevOps and AWS played a key role in getting us there. Basically, our adoption of these new approaches and new technologies started back in 2011. At that point, as a company, we were dealing with rapid change, largely driven by the heavy start of consumers adopting and consuming music through a digital device or a digitally streamed service. And then it's pretty much, as you would expect, have gone only up since then. Our platform at the time there was one single kind of primary core system in the middle there, and it was primarily a monolithic application where most of the functionality and processing of our core business process was run there. In addition, we had a few other smaller systems off to the right and left, but they were largely disjointed. The integration was not seamless, and we had a lot of heavy manual processes and error-prone processes that were trying to keep everything running. And essentially, we were struggling to keep up with the volume and the scale. At the same period, we were also discussing as a business, how could we evolve, how could we diversify beyond what our initial core mission is and was. And essentially, we needed a technology platform that would enable that. And so at the end of the day, we said we needed a new platform and we needed a new approach to how we delivered IT. As I was saying, our legacy system, it was primarily a J2EE-based system. Our process and our kind of approach to IT was more of a traditional process. It was largely waterfall. It was largely on-premise, highly manual process. And we knew that to get to our future state, we needed a whole new approach. So this diagram on the right hand of the screen there is really what we defined back in 2011 as what our target future state we were trying to get to. We had a few goals in trying to get to that state. One, we needed to meet not just our current needs that we knew of, but the projected future needs, as well as supporting new emerging business models. We knew we needed to diversify. We knew we needed to kind of take a new approach, but we actually couldn't predict everything that we would need our platform to do. So we needed something that could evolve as the business evolved. We needed to remove the technology drag that we were experiencing in our business and basically get ahead of that. That was a big driver. And we also needed to do it in a flexible, reliable, rapid, and cost-effective way. So the resulting architecture was defined as largely modular, a collection of independent systems that could stand alone but work together as a platform. That allowed us to make different technology decisions per component, and so we could pick the right technology for the right need. And then we also had the opportunity to scale just that component as the business needed it. So that gave us a lot of flexibility that we did not have with the old system. We also proposed moving to a largely open source software stack, as well as we saw the cloud as a key enabler for us to get to where we wanted to go. Although I have to say at the beginning, we weren't entirely sure that it was going to be able to support all of our needs. So we were a little skeptical, but we knew that's where we wanted to go. And then lastly, we strongly believed in adopting an agile software development methodology, as well as leveraging DevOps in terms of how we delivered our technology. So so that was 2011. In early 2012, we actually started executing on that. We didn't try to achieve everything all at once. We said, let's do it in a very agile, incremental, iterative way. So we picked a very small system, our company website, to be our first step into the new model. But we just started building our expertise in this new approach and new platform with AWS, and just kept building from there. And fast forward a few years, for a large period of time, we actually had kind of a hybrid of the left and the right. So as we developed a new module, we would integrate it with the old platform, and we had like I said, a hybrid between the two. And then finally, as of February of last year, we were completely off of the old platform and completely on the new platform. So as I stand here today, we're 100% cloud-based, running DevOps as our primary way of delivering, as well as using Agile. I'm going to hand it off here to Reed to go into more detail, but essentially, as I started off, DevOps and AWS were key enablers to us getting to be able to achieve our successful transformation.
Engineering at SoundExchange. Kind of where we were in 2011 prior to starting the rebuild of the platform. We had a very small in-house IT department. I think we had about 5 people, mostly help desk, a couple in-house DBAs, and then a set of consultants who had built and were maintaining the legacy platform. Our process for building and deploying software was to have a developer build an IR file, give it to a DBA, maybe with a set of manual procedures they would have to run, and the DBAs would try and execute those procedures very literally and deploy software. We would have, what this led to was kind of a regular deployment process might take a few hours. It might not have gone well, and we have to revert it, figure out what went wrong, try it again. We also faced issues coming from the fact that our environments, so we were WebLogic and Oracle database, those were our deployment containers. Those were all hand-rolled, so we had about 6 environments, one being production, the rest non-prod. But when you're triaging issues, so we had out-of-memory errors, performance issues. When we were triaging those issues, because it was mostly manual and our infrastructure was not version controlled, we wound up with a lot of environment drift. And what that means is, production is configured with 200 database connections, and then dev is configured with 100, and you can reproduce an issue in prod, but you can't in dev. So it makes it very difficult to triage issues. So we were effectively in this almost constant firefighting mode where every day we're just waiting for the servers to crash, or waiting for users to say, the system or this part of the system is not working. So what this meant is, as a business, we were really trying to focus on this new platform, which was going to enable us to do a lot more with our business more efficiently, more capabilities, better for our customers. And us in the technology department, we were really just fighting fires, and so it was very hard to focus on helping the business with their progress. Bringing us to where we are today, we have built out our in-house engineering team. We've got about 32 people overall, up from 5. We spent a lot of effort on hiring really solid engineers, full stack engineers who can think about a problem from end to end. Agile focus, small teams, open source rather than big commercial products. DevOps being at the core of how we build and release software. And as Scott mentioned, obviously, heavy use of the AWS public cloud. And in those 6 years, we managed to rebuild our platform as roughly 6 internal systems. And then from there, we've actually built a number of systems on top of that. And where we are today is a very strong enabler for what the business wants to do. It's a pretty regular occurrence that the business will come up with an idea, engage with us as to how we can build it, and we can just get started. We can stand up new environments very quickly, start to get prototypes running, and we can deliver a production system pretty quickly, especially relative to where we were in 2011. Some of the other practices that we feel complement DevOps and cloud very well are these. So those small teams, 1 to 2 pizza teams. So we've got some development teams that are just 2 or 3 engineers. We don't really tend to go beyond 6 or 7 engineers. It just becomes a little too unwieldy. It also implies that the system you're building might be too big, too monolithic. As Scott mentioned, we're using Agile. We use Scrum or Kanban, depending on what makes sense. Loose coupling using REST APIs rather than build time dependencies. We find that when it comes to DevOps, means that we can build and release code without having to worry about a static compile dependency on another system. We also try and use really lightweight architectures. So we don't have anything like a big enterprise service bus or kind of choke points or bottleneck components. There's not a lot of shared resourcing or resources. We're obviously continuously building and releasing. So all day long, throughout the day, we have developers committing to the same branch so that we're getting constant integration, which means if somebody introduces a breakage, it's probably something that can be fixed relatively quickly because the amount of code that's changed between that commit and the previous commit isn't that much. In the old model, it would basically be we'd build for weeks and weeks and weeks, try and bring everything together, deploy it, and it often ran into issues. As part of the continuous build and release process, we've automated as much testing as we possibly can. So functional testing, performance testing, load testing, we get really quick feedback if a developer releases a change and it introduces a functional bug, or it's now 10 times slower. We can catch it right away. It doesn't have to wait till it goes all the way to production. Another thing we really wanted to make sure that we did, because we have this distributed platform, is to make sure that if a system has a dependency, so a number of our components in the slide that Scott mentioned have dependencies on other systems. We want to allow those systems to go up and down throughout the day, or if they're doing a deployment. So we basically designed how you would do that. So you would have ways to quickly detect that your dependency is down and provide a graceful degradation to your application so that users can still use 80% of it, they just maybe can't do 20% of it. We thought it was important to help define, at least in our terms, DevOps. We've seen cases where different companies call what they're doing DevOps. And what we've seen, what we're doing, and Netflix is quite similar, some other well-known companies, it's really about enabling your engineers to develop software and support it in production. For us, what's really key in enabling this is to have a team who is focused on, we call it our DevOps team, who's focused on building capabilities that allow that to happen well. So I'll get into what they're doing in a little bit. But if we didn't have that team and we just had sets of development teams trying to all push code to production without any standards, without the right tools, it probably would not have gone well. But because we have this, we've got very high system stability and quality. We are in a state where I mentioned hiring full stack engineers. To us, what that means is that you have an engineer who can listen to a requirement, figure out what they're going to modify in the front end, the middle tier, the back end, what AWS technology they're going to use, what new DevOps capabilities we might need, so new CloudFormation templates, a new way to deploy some new component that we've never deployed before. In the old world, we had a lot of back and forth between developers and DBAs. We'd have a performance issue, and a DBA who knows databases really well is going to focus on the database. And they're going to look at CPU and query timings, and the developer's going to look at the code changes they made, but there's not this overarching looking at the whole problem. We're now in a state where these engineers are looking at the whole problem, their code, how it's deployed, what services it's running on. And we've just found that we've got very efficient teams, very low bug counts in production, very high stability. And for us as a nonprofit, headcount really matters. It's difficult to acquire new headcount, so we need to look for ways to help us scale. And DevOps has definitely let us do that. Right now we have 8 small-ish dev teams running roughly 400 EC2 and RDS instances and no separate operations team, and we're a lot more stable than we were in that old model. To touch a little bit more on that DevOps team, because I think it's so critical, what it really is we have these development teams. So our licensee development team, matching team, repertoire rights, these other teams. Really at the center of all those teams is our DevOps team. We call them the developers for the developers. They're building capabilities that enable the developers to do their job and follow this DevOps philosophy. And what they're really focused on are building capabilities. So when we first got started, the first thing we did was think about how are we going to do change management. So how are we going to version control not just code, but infrastructure, our configuration properties? How are we going to secure our passwords? How are we going to manage kind of the skeleton infrastructure of our environment? So that's the main thing we did when we started, was focus on change management and really locking that down. Because in the old legacy platform, we really didn't have much change management process at all, which led to a lot of pain. We found pretty quickly that having some basic set of cloud standards was a good idea. Because we allowed roughly 40 engineers to all be in the AWS console, launching things, playing around with things, we needed them to tag things in a certain way so that we could keep track of what this thing was. We could look at how much it was costing us. We needed it to be standardized in how it was named so that the tools we were building that would hook into AWS could leverage those tags in a programmatic way. The team is also looking at the capabilities that AWS provides you from a reliability standpoint. So they're looking at things like how can we scale in response to an event, either an AZ being down or just load. We've built capabilities around evacuating a zone if an AZ is not totally out, but it's partially out or has some issues going on, which to an end user, they don't really care about. They just know that this is not working. So we focus on building some things on top of AWS there to give us more reliability. Monitoring was pretty key for us because we have a distributed platform, so we need to know, is the platform healthy? And we need a way for each of the applications to know, are my dependencies there? Can I talk to them? Are they healthy? And so that I can respond to that. So we looked at what we could get from AWS out of the box for free. We added New Relic. We felt like for some of the monitors that we have, there are some certain critical monitors, like running out of disk space can actually lead to very problematic consequences. So we built in some redundant monitors so that we ensure that we never have that happen. We also built some standards around when you develop a web application that you expose REST APIs that can be called by these tools that can give you insights into how the application is behaving. So things like you call a key transaction and make sure that that key transaction can function. So all these standards are coming up through the DevOps team, being shared with the development team, and then we get feedback from them and keep kind of maturing those different capabilities. Security of the platform, the fact that we wouldn't want somebody to expose an S3 bucket to the world. This team is looking at IAM controls, S3 controls, all those controls that, and then they want to balance having security controls, but also not tying the hands of the developer, because that would go against the primary directive, which is that engineers can build software and experiment and think about it end to end. And lastly, cloud management. So we need somebody to be focused on how much we're paying for AWS. Are we using resources efficiently? So we look at tools and reporting that helps us with that. And lastly, this was pretty key for us. We knew that we would probably keep the same size DevOps team, 3 people, but keep increasing the number of applications and developers. So what we wanted to do whenever we built a capability was build it in such a way that it was maintainable, extendable by the developers. So that meant things like picking the same tech stacks or the same programming languages for how we deploy our software in DevOps as to how we do on the development teams. So that led us to things like looking at Ansible over Chef, where we do Python versus Ruby. So just a little bit of our history and kind of how we got to where we are today. The first year we really focused on stabilizing the legacy the platform, getting our feet wet in AWS so that we felt comfortable that it was worth doing the next thing and the next thing in AWS. That then led us to develop that basic set of cloud standards, selecting our initial build tools. The first thing we did was let's automate the builds. So we selected tools for that. We went with Jenkins at the time. There's certainly been a lot more tools out there since then. And then what we did over the years as we built new systems was we gathered feedback from the developers, adapted our capabilities to fit their new requirements. And so where we are now, 5 or 6 years later, we have a very mature set of capabilities that I mentioned on those other slides. And we have most of the dev teams now owning and using and adapting all of these capabilities. So just some raw numbers. we definitely feel as an organization that we're able to execute very quickly, very reliably. This kind of conveys that a little bit. In the old world in 2011, we only built and deployed maybe 50 times a year, probably less. We're now doing tens of thousands of builds throughout the year. We're deploying to production at least one system a week. It might be a small set of features, but we're getting it out to production to reduce risk and deliver value. And these are some additional kind of comparisons. We had a lot of instability problems. We now have some systems of 100% availability because we now have ways through DevOps to do zero downtime deployments. You could deploy software, have the new servers come up. Once they're up and healthy, we drop the old servers. Users don't experience any outage. We have very dependable, reliable deployments. We can have anywhere up to 8 or 9 non-prod environments that any release goes through, depending on how we need to test it. Every time it's put in a new environment, it functions just as it did in the past environment. That was not the case in the old model. We can provision servers or the entire platform in a number of hours. In the old world, if we needed to buy servers, we'd be looking at weeks or months. We can release daily, weekly. We can scale out horizontally, whereas in the old world, we just kept having to pay more and more for more expensive, faster SANs, and we could only really do vertically scaling. So for us, deploying software and keeping it reliable, it's almost been a non-event. And what that means for us is that we can really focus on the business, whereas before we were spending so much time focusing on just technical operations, keeping the systems up. And I just want to leave you with some of the key decisions we had to make along the way. These are things I think you want to look at and think about yourselves. We wanted to make sure that the DevOps team building these capabilities wasn't doing it off in a silo, that it was really aligning with our tech stacks, the way development schedules were running, the principles that we put forth on kind of software development principles. We wanted all of that to align. One thing that definitely helped was the two teams kind of reported into the same person. Had there been maybe somebody in charge of DevOps team and development team, if those people worked really well together, it might have worked just as well, but that really helped to have a shared common vision. And then as we looked at tools that we were looking at and looking at their capabilities, we wanted to make sure that, again, developers would be able to use them, enhance them, not have to have a big learning curve. And we wanted to facilitate feedback between the dev teams and developers. We do that through Jira boards, HipChat. There's this constant communication going on. And run out of time, so I'll leave you with you guys to read those yourself. But I just want to reiterate, DevOps, I think if we hadn't done it and we hadn't used the AWS cloud, we'd probably still be building the platform today. It was very easy for us to get started with it. The first thing we did was automate builds. If you haven't started yet, I'd probably suggest starting there. Thank you very much, and you'll be talking to Ellucian next.
Well, good afternoon. My name is David Joseph, and I'm Senior Director of DevOps Adoption and Implementation at Ellucian. And so as we talk about this whole phenomena around DevOps, first, let me give you a little bit of background about Ellucian and our contributions towards that whole transformation, that whole DevOps cultural transformation that is taking place today. So Ellucian has been in the higher education space for well over 4 decades and is the leader in higher education technology today. We serve over 18 million students in over 2,400 institutions of higher learning, colleges and universities, in over 40 countries around the world. We have 4 very large flagship student systems targeting anywhere from small community colleges to very large Ivy League schools. And we at Ellucian take education very seriously. We are very passionate about education. So student success is very important to us. We have our products are deployed on-prem, giving our customers the ability to manage their workloads on-prem, manage their deployments, manage their upgrades and their updates and their customizations. As well, over the past decade or so, there has been this massive energy towards the cloud, where we have been a very key and vibrant player in hosting our customers' workload in the cloud. As well, in the past couple of years, a very, very vibrant SaaS offering of our products. So before I get further, yes, it can be done. We have changed our culture in less than 2 years. Sort of kind of gone from 0 to 60 in less than 10 seconds. So, and we'll share a little bit more about that and how we've been there. Of course, AWS, Amazon has been a great partner with us throughout this journey. Oops. Okay. So anytime you decide that you want to start a new project or you want to introduce change, whether it is change in a process or whether it's changes in technology, the first thing and the first question that you have to ask yourself as a business is why? What is driving that change? What are the business results you're expecting to get out of those changes? What are the results and the ROIs you're expecting to get out of it? Now, in the pre-DevOps and the pre-cloud era, everything was sort of mostly manual, and if you guys are very familiar with it, it's sort of kind of aligned with the waterfall methodology. Now, of course, the business is all about speed and innovation, right? Speed and innovation. The business wants them cheaper, faster, better, right? And something that the customer can use. The only way that you can get the speed and the innovation that the customer is expecting and the business is expecting is through this massive change in your philosophy. Whether it's your processes, your technology, in this case it's automation, or this big change in the culture that needs to take place. It also addressed the problem around repeatability, reliability, the quality of your deployment, the quality of your software, but it did not stop there. Of course, it also addressed this big problem around lowering your labor cost and eliminating things like manual touch points, which inherently becomes very destructive because anytime you have someone manually changing something, it's very highly error prone. One of the big things in this whole phenomena is around collaboration. Collaboration and feedback. Collaboration not only from your customers, but also internally within your key stakeholders within the business. It used to be that way back in the days, 95% SLA uptime was acceptable. Try turning on your Netflix on Friday night and your date night, and you get a message say, okay, hang on a second, I'm doing an update. How would you like that? So you see, with the speed of innovation and the digital transformation, the revolution we are in today, time is important. You need information and access to information 24/7. So even a 99.9% in some cases are not good enough. So this whole DevOps concept was very new to us as a company, and of course, Amazon was right there with us from a tooling perspective. They were there with us from a security. They provided the technology for us. But we at Ellucian had to do a 180 when it came to automation and when it came to changing the culture that will ultimately get us from here to there. So the first thing that we did is that we started by reviewing and assessing our skills and our talent pool. And it was very obvious. It was very obvious that we had to hire new talents and sort of kind of change our whole philosophy around hiring. We also took the approach to retrain our resources. And one of the things that we did is we created study groups, a study group program to train folks on the concept, the tools, and started to socialize that within the company around that culture that we wanted to build. We even brought in some consultants and embedded them into our product teams, and just for a few months so that they can help those product teams to organically develop those skills within. Like any other company that's around for maybe as long as we have been, 40 years or 4 decades plus, you're always going to find where you have resources that have been around for a long time, lots of tenure. One of the exciting things, and I want people to understand this, automation does not take your job away. It does not take your job away. It creates new opportunities for you. Last year, we certified close to 50 of our employees on with Amazon certifications. This year, we are on track to certify anywhere between 50 and 70. So automation does not take your job away. It's a FUD. And we have to understand that. It creates new opportunity for you. One of the big things, another big takeaway in this whole cultural transformation is in the DevOps era, this whole organizational thing changed a lot because folks in the pre-DevOps area, what you find is that organizations tend to move in their own swim lanes. They have their own agendas. They were operating in silos, right? That's completely opposite in a DevOps culture. What you want in a DevOps culture is all these organizations to be moving inward towards a company goal, a company objective. It's not about one single organization within the company. It's about everyone working together. As part of that, what we did is that we created a DevOps group, 2 groups for that matter of fact. One group was specifically responsible for creating the baseline architectural tooling that got embedded into the product team, and they built on that. And the other part of the team was the DevOps adoption, implementation, and this group actually helped to monitor the maturity and holds them accountable for their goals and objectives. If you don't have accountability, you're going to fail. You have to have accountability. So this whole journey that we've been on, we understood what our goals were, but we had very little to start from, especially since historically we were primarily on the other spectrum of DevOps. So back in the second half of 2014, we brought in some consultants from within the industry to assist us with our assessment of our cloud program. And as you could imagine, the score was not good. It was not good. And we were not surprised. We knew that going into this. But we just wanted someone else to come in and tell us that your score is not good. There's work for us to do. So in Q2, we brought in some DevOps consultants and some subject matter specialists. And so we married them with some of our subject matter specialists within the company. And we launched our DevOps program it's like April 1st, 2015. First day we started. And today we are, I think, and Scott probably have the numbers well, we are way above close to advanced maturity level. So you can get a little bit more specific to that. That's how fast we moved. But it took the the entire company to be bought into that culture, all the way from executive level down to the person who is testing the software. Okay. We also had a dedicated AWS solutions architect on-prem with us, available to us 7 days a week. So very, very useful for us as we kind of went through this journey here. That happened until last year. Maybe Q4 last year, that's when that role became a part-time role. And by that time, they kind of transitioned off because we were well on track towards our goal, and we were much more mature than probably anyone expected us to be at that time. And last but not least, as these product teams became more efficient and started to become more organically organized, and their skill level were up to the level that they were expected to perform, we exited our consultants, right? So now we are a company that are much organically organized. We have all the skills and resources that we need to carry out our program. So just a little bit about how we brought on board a product. So we have, like I said, 4 ERPs, major ERPs with about 100+ add-on applications. But one of the first thing that we do when we onboard a product into the DevOps pipeline, and one of the things that to note is that we just didn't bring everybody on board on day one. We brought them on selectively by quarters, right? So that you have that constant cycle going through. But one of the first things that we do is that we conduct a high-level analysis, and then we get a little deeper into the product themselves, kind of do an assessment of their processes and their technology. And then we compare that with a reference architecture that we built for the company, so that as a company, we are using one reference architecture, not every product going their own different ways. So we compared what they have versus what we want it to look like, and out of that, we created we understood what that is, and we assessed what the gaps were, and based on that, we start to we kind of put together a plan. How are they going to get from where they were to where they need to be? And in some cases, it was much more difficult than others, of course, because our product has been around for 4 decades, and even though it has evolved over time, there's still elements of legacy components in there. So architecturally, it was not just a clean match, but some work we had to do. And of course, we made sure that we had our acceptance testing and all our acceptance criteria all defined, so that when the product teams declare something done, it is really done, and not done, and not just done but, right? So the journey for us has been very interesting, and like I said, in under 2 years, we did it. So putting this all together, DevOps sort of kind of brought this all together. It brought the culture, the technology, the processes, everything together. And as you can imagine, in the legacy model, infrastructure is manually deployed, and generally are very highly error-prone, because anytime you're doing something manually, you're opening yourself for manual mistakes. In the pre-DevOps era, you also have things like security checks and stuff are done in production. Now, I don't know if you have any fishermen in here, but have you ever tried scaling a fish before you caught it? Almost quite impossible to do, right? So you really don't want your vulnerabilities to be in production, and then you're going to try to solve it, right? You want to catch that before it even gets to production. So that's why in this DevOps construct now, everything has been shifted left into production, right, where you're doing all your unit testing, your functional testing, your performance testing, your security scans. All of that has been shifted left. So you don't have to worry about vulnerabilities and defects. Well, some things might get out there, but it has been drastically reduced from that perspective. Okay, so the bottom line is, you're not in this firefighting mode anymore, right? It's more monitoring and being proactive versus trying to be reactive to situations. Okay, well, I'll let Scott share with you how we measure maturity.
As I said, I'm Scott Mumal, Senior Manager of DevOps Implementation and Adoption at Ellucian. One of the things that set the context when we started this journey 2 years ago, a little more than that, is that we were going to take some of the facets that David talked about and distribute the knowledge across our dev teams. We wanted our application teams to be able to pick up this journey and carry it forward even after we made it through the initial throes of becoming a DevOps-enabled organization. We wanted to stage ourselves so that we had a continuing organizational change that was going to persist after the consultants were gone out the door. A change that was going to drive that innovation and drive that agility and reduce the speed or reduce the time it takes us to get a product into our production environments. That meant that we took these legacy products, 40-year-old, 30-year-old products. We took new products, so Node.js applications, Dockerized applications, right alongside those big, heavy ERPs, and we moved them all. And the way we did that is pull that knowledge and expertise down into the development teams. Those consultants that we had in early 2015 were part of that journey. They were embedded within the development teams to start to provide the background, to provide that jump start that the teams needed. And then as we worked through that process and we phased out the consultant arm of the organization, we picked up adoption team members in to help supplement the teams. And to this date, we still use adoption team members who are subject matter experts, along with our DevOps core team that manage our tools, to help push our development teams in the right direction, help make those decisions, help make sure that we're driving for success. Well, how do we know when we're going to hit success? It's like setting out on a journey, and you need to know where the end of the road is. What's it going to look like? Well, one of the things that we had done organizationally in 2014, coming up into the beginning of 2015, is reinvigorated our pledge to Agile. We were going to readopt Agile Scrum practices within the organization and ensure that we're headed where we wanted to be from Agile practitioners. To do that, we had this Agile assessment scale that we used that helped us measure where we were. We could look at our application teams and make conscious decisions. Are we doing the right things? Are our dev teams needing help in a particular area? How fast are we going? What momentum do we have? And so based upon that Agile model that we had, we could update our processes. We could step back and look and see what kind of effect those changes had on the organization. Retrospectively, we could then measure where we were and make the changes again and start that cycle. So iteratively, we improved ourselves as an organization. That process worked really well from an Agile perspective. So when we embarked on the DevOps journey, we applied the same kind of semantics. Can we use a model that's going to help drive organizational change and help us understand when we're being successful at that? So one of the things that we first set out to find, researching on the internet, was a model that would help categorize all the kinds of changes that we were going to place on our dev teams and our operation teams. We were literally transforming from the ground, the roots, upward, everything that we do. Developers were going to be given this wealth of a stack of technologies from AWS, starting out with basic compute and network and storage services, and they could jump in and kind of know how to use those because we've all been using virtualized technology for a while, but they really couldn't apply them to transform the organization to become one that's utilizing those services effectively, making the changes that drive that innovation. Well, the way to do that is to help those teams understand what kinds of changes organically need to happen to position us carefully. We did that because we couldn't find a model on the internet, developing our own model, where we took the DevOps experience and we divided it across a series of verticals or categories. Each one of those we sliced into levels that help us define where we are. So we built a matrix that helps our teams understand how we're going to progress. So characteristics of that matrix, configuration management. So how are we managing our code? How are we managing our resources that are inputs and outputs of our processes? How are we doing our builds and our tests? We were doing some of that before, but lots of opportunity for growth and improvement. And then building on that, we had CI, to some extent in the beginning, but what we really didn't have was strong CD and strong operations. We didn't have deployments that happen automated. That's when hands hit the keyboard, and that's when the mistakes happen. That's when the speed fell to the wayside. To make this effective, we had to bring in infrastructure as code. We had to adopt not just those core services that AWS provide, but we need to step back and look, where do we adopt platforms as a service? Where do we adopt containerized technologies in ECS? Where do we go serverless? Where do we take all of this platform of technologies and apply them? How do we apply them? This framework gave us that opportunity to define a set of characteristics that our dev teams could start to understand. They went all the way from the beginning of the development process through operations and into the full stack. So we went top to bottom. What do we need to think about to monitor our applications, to make sure that we're using applications that are across multiple availability zones and we get the resiliency that we want? How do we tackle multi-regions? How do we tackle disaster recovery? All the aspects when you think about a solution that's deployed as a SaaS solution. That framework that we built even goes down inside the applications to a degree, looking at things like what kind of database technology is sitting at the bottom of it. Can we be transformative and move from what we have done before with manually driven processes, schema changes, managing our data manually, to really cranking up the maturity of that process? With this framework in hand, we built ourselves a way to help those dev teams move forward. To do that, each one of these squares that you see on the matrix became a point where we could step back and say, here's what the global criteria looks like at a certain level in a certain vertical. We can then write stories or write a template for stories that told what we wanted to have happen. We could take that template of stories and pull them into an application team's development backlog. So our teams use Jira. So within Jira, we pulled in this series of stories and we showed them what this big picture looks like. And the first reaction of every development team is, oh my gosh, we've got a long ways to go. But the steps that you take is then to start to break that down. You take this model and you deconstruct it bit by bit and you lead the teams through, starting at the build end, starting at the deployment end. It depends on the team where you start. Where's their strength? Where's their weakness? So you can build upon their strengths and you can fill in their weaknesses as you move forward. Working across that framework, also with those template of stories in Jira, gave us an opportunity to sit down with the product owners and the scrum masters and the developers, the leads, and let's make the decisions. We know we can't change the architecture inside of every application day one. So we have to start with, let's don't lift and shift, let's don't do manual things, but let's go bit by bit across our application stack. Levels of maturity as we move up the scale will help us then get back to those architectural changes that are going to turn those 30 and 40-year-old applications into real cloud-native apps. But we had to walk before we could crawl. With a framework pushed into Jira, then we turned from a way of where we could objectively understand where we were. It wasn't guessing are we making progress? Are we transforming the organization? We could emphatically say, we're making these kinds of differences. We've got those kinds of gaps that we need to tackle as an organization and push in the right direction. The Jira backlog gave us something that we could query across all 20 or 30 application teams and see collectively where we are, and we could position our strengths. We could pull in subject matter experts and tackle the things that we needed to do. Those stories gave us metrics. They gave us measurements. When you put that alongside the strength of automated testing, whether that's functional, unit testing, performance testing, we start to paint a picture of where we are on that DevOps spectrum. And we could also, at the same time, bring in DevSecOps. So we can push our security scans early in our pipelines, build a process that lets us measure where we are across all those spectrums of DevOps and testing and security understanding. Where do we have vulnerabilities? Where are we remediating things? That big picture tied into a framework that we started out when we built our framework that reinforced the whole process. The Amazon well-architected framework. We could look at the pillars that were part of that and understand how are we making a difference for security? What are we doing for reliability? Our deployment talks about multiple availability zones, multiple regions. We had that synergy between what Amazon provided for us and what we were doing inside our organization, that across all 5 pillars of the well-architected framework, we knew that we were being successful if we're tackling those DevOps stories. Add that all together, we had a very compelling resource that we provided to our teams. Not just people, not just tools. We had the driving force that helped them eat this elephant one bite at a time, that since early 2015, we could make a change that really is visible. It's not just a surface change, it really is impacting the way we do business at Ellucian. We took a situation where we lifted and shifted environments to now where we're deploying cloud-native apps in a SaaS format. We went from a situation with little and weak testing, whether that's functional or performance or security scans, to where we're doing it religiously in our pipelines. We know that the development teams can build a cadence into their pipeline that when they push something to production, it's been through a test and not at the 11th hour. We know that it happened as they went through that process. We went from a situation where hands were all over keyboards to where we're doing things with automation. We're doing that with Jenkins jobs that are running on a regular basis, so deconstructing build and test and deployment pipelines for lots of different applications. We ended up with thousands of jobs running every day, automated, so no hands in that to make the mistakes that we'd been making in the past. And at the same time, we got the agility that we needed as we were going through that process. So we knew that what used to take us weeks to do by hand is now taking minutes or hours, depending on how big that application suite is, that we really transformed ourselves organizationally. So in summary, using the tools that AWS provided, providing a framework around it, you really can make a transformative change within the organization that happens top to bottom, left to right, using DevOps as that focal point for change. Thank you.
All right. I don't know that we have too much time for questions, but we'll be happy to stay afterwards. If anybody has any questions, come on up and feel free to ask. Thanks.